Here today for the interview is Dr. Monica Burns. Monica is a former New York City public school teacher and currently an ed tech and curriculum consultant. She is also the author of EdTech Essentials, which was published in 2021 by ASCD. Monica works with schools and organizations around the world to support them with the thoughtful integration of technology. And she is also the host of the Easy EdTech podcast. Now, of course, some might say Easy EdTech is a paradox, but
Mhm.
that is exactly why we've invited Monica here today. So, Monica, I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I'm excited to have you here. Happy New Year, by the way.
Mhm.
I'm a recent subscriber to your podcast,
Mhm.
and I think it's great, both content and delivery. So I'm really looking forward to digging into our topic today because ed tech is not something we've talked a lot about on the podcast. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today. But before we do that, let's start with your journey as an educator. Before we dig into the substance, the content of our conversation, the arc of your career. Walk us through the journey and maybe some of the impact points of that journey that led you to becoming an ed tech expert here in 2022.
Absolutely. Well, I started my education career. My undergraduate degree was in elementary education and jumped right into the classroom, teaching in New York City public schools in a very traditional public school, chalk and a chalkboard, overhead projector, all of those great things. And then that school transitioned into a magnet school. So we became a magnet school for environmental stewardship. That was our theme. So I was just in Wisconsin in December talking to educators there and showing pictures of the compost bin on one side of my classroom and the iPad cart, on the other side of the
Right.
classroom. I love those visuals next to each other to just talk about the balance, right, around
Right.
using digital tools. And so we became a one-to-one school. iPads were our device of choice. And that was, more than 10 years ago. So really early on with one-to-one, not the first school by any means, but where I was in New York City, not a lot of schools were one-to-one, not a lot with iPad. And the folks at Apple Education in New York had asked me to, come down one day after school and talk to some teachers about what I was doing in my classroom. And I came and showed up, and it ended up being, a couple hundred teachers where I do not have any background, in public speaking experience, at least not at that point, 2011-ish or so. And, that's when I was able to just start sharing, and people started asking, where can we follow? Do you have a blog? Right. And all things I didn't have answers to, right? All questions I
Mhm.
didn't quite have answers to because I was kind of in my own little world, right? In my classroom at a wonderful school with wonderful colleagues who I could talk to and chat with. But,
Mhm.
that's really when my blog started. So this year actually is coming up on 10 years of classtechtips.com,
Mhm.
3 years of the Easy Ed Tech podcast this spring. And after a few years of staying in that one-to-one environment, I left the classroom. So now about half of my work is professional development, working with educators. Used to be a lot more on the road, now a lot more virtual. So whether it's
Right.
schools or districts or conferences or organizations that serve teachers. And then the other half of my work is writing around ed tech. So I've got a few publications like Ed Tech Essentials that you
Mhm.
mentioned, the blog, of course, and then
Mhm.
some partnerships and works that I do with different ed tech companies. So
Mhm.
that's really been kind of the journey to where, we're sitting here today with kind of a phone call, me ready to share and talk about this topic
Right.
that I was really passionate about. And along the way, going back to school, getting my doctorate, writing a lot about ed tech, and spending time in lots of other educators' classrooms, both face to face and virtually, of course.
So many similarities in stories about, people who become, quote unquote experts in areas. It always seems to start so organically that we try some things, we start introducing things, we share what we're doing, people start asking us questions, and it kind of grows organically, doesn't it? And then here you are 10 years later. It's almost like it's not as if you decided 10 years ago, I'm going
Mhm.
to be an expert. It just kind of unfolds one step at a time for sure.
Mhm.
And it's interesting, just so many people that I talk to share that similarity in terms of their story and how it kind of unfolds for them. Okay, I want to start with what I feel is a big overarching question. And so I'm coming in hot on this question
Mhm.
because I'm finding it. I'm getting to a point where there is a kind of a level of frustration here
Yeah.
in 2022, and I might be asking this question in a bit of a blunt, maybe somewhat inartful way. But I wouldn't consider myself ahead of the curve when it comes to technology by any stretch. There was a point where I felt that way maybe 20 years ago, but I think I'm not there. But I'd probably say I'm in the upper half of of people, but nowhere near the top for sure. But at what point does it become professionally negligent for educators to ignore tech? I still hear in even now in 2022, oh, I don't do tech. I'm old school. And if look, if you need help learning tech, then of course there's people like yourself and
Mhm.
others out there who can often help them. Look, no problem. If you need help, if the will is there, then the skill can be taught. But I think a lot of my frustration comes from the fact that there are people who just kind of hold out and don't invest in as some kind of badge of honor. This is,
Mhm.
I'm holding out from technology because I'm old school, and they almost hold it up as a badge of honor. Now, I know this is a long question, but from your perspective, are we at a point in education where tech should be considered essential, and that educators who are just resisting it from an unwillingness to invest in technology, is there a level of negligence there as educators in 2022?
So I think, we're at a point, and I would have said this 2 years ago, if we were January 2020, right, chatting
Mhm.
about this, that there are places and all of the things we do in education to use technology to do things better or to do things in a more efficient way, in a
Mhm.
more authentic way, and in a way that really takes into the account what students need in order to be successful, competent, ready for whatever is in front of them. And I'm confident that I would have said, right, that same sort of sentence to you 2 years ago.
Right.
And now, January 2022, in a situation that looks very different after 2 years that have been very unexpected. One of the things that I've heard many people say that, I agree with here is that, this is an acceleration, right? We knew that we would be at a point where there need to be some level of proficiency in different
Mhm.
digital spaces with digital tools. And we just accelerated that. And you can have the argument of how much that accelerated, right? But
Right.
we definitely jumped fast, right, into a world that we probably could have said, the folks like you mentioned who were very hesitant or resistant probably would have acknowledged we were headed in that direction, but maybe
Mhm.
thought we had more time, right? And so when it comes to working with folks who are very dismissive, right, of technology or who are
Mhm.
holding on to certain practices, I acknowledge that there's a level of nostalgia there, right? There may be things that have always felt like they're working really well, but really
Mhm.
when you take a step back and you say, is this working really well for everyone? Right? Am I reaching everyone and making sure that they have what they need in order to be successful moving forward? And I think it's really
Mhm.
hard to make an argument across disciplines, right? Looking really widely, that you can truly prepare students for their future without having some level of interaction with digital tools and proficiency building with technology. And that can look very, very different in every
Mhm.
classroom, right? So if you
Right.
are in a situation where you traditionally are working really hands on, right, with different tools, with different resources, right, it doesn't mean that that's the only part of what a student would need to do if they even went into that industry, right? They're going to
Mhm.
need to understand how to correspond in digital spaces. You have a student who is building a business that might primarily rely on non-digital things, they're still going to need to communicate in those spaces, talk to clients, tell the story of their work, right? Be able to run through finances or find someone even who's going to be able to have that
Mhm.
capacity, even if they're not doing all the Excel building out for their small business. So I think to say that there's a 0 or 100, right, is it's a false choice to say that it has
Right.
to be one or the other. But I do think there's some room, and you might find that in one particular discipline or content area, you're going to be a little bit heavier on that scale. But to say that it's all or nothing, right, in any subject area, I just think is a really hard argument for someone to make. So, I'm hesitant to
Mhm.
use the word, negligent, broadly, right? But when you're having specific conversations with educators, and I definitely talk to a lot of folks who are hesitant, and again, now and in the past, I think it's really about finding those stories and listening and hearing what's happening in their classroom, because there's often ways, right? We all don't know what we don't know. And
Right.
sometimes you just have to have that conversation that says, oh, I didn't even know that was possible. Or now that you say that.
Right.
And, of course, it comes in with some of the things you mentioned of having the best intentions, right? If you're coming from a
Right.
place of
Right.
growth and you're open and willing to have those conversations. And I think there's a lot of movement that can take place.
Right, absolutely, and certainly, I was purposefully trying to be a bit
Mhm,
provocative with the question, and the point about negligence for me is the unwillingness. You can't.
mhm,
You're absolutely right that you don't know what you don't know, but it's the unwillingness. It's as you were responding there, it makes me think about this idea of often people will say we need to meet our students where they are. We need to be a learner
mhm.
responsive teacher. It's pretty hard to say that you're a learner responsive and then at the same time simultaneously reject technology, because our students now live in the
Right.
technological world, and whatever judgment one might place upon whether it's social
Mhm.
media or any other platforms, that is where they are, and the negligence for me comes with the unwillingness, and certainly we can't blame them for that. And the other point is hard to imagine. January of 2020, pre-pandemic.
Right.
It is incredible to think about, but I think you're spot on, and we see this in so many areas. I see it certainly in the area I work in assessment and grading. Is the conversations that were long overdue were certainly accelerated in the spring of 2020 as well. But again, to the other side of the point for teachers, it's not for me the will. The will is something I think we're being negligent on, but at the same time,
Mhm.
in defense of teachers,
Yeah. Mhm.
we obviously in recent years have seen a massive tech explosion in education. So, as much as I can sort of look to that negligent side, I can't blame teachers and administrators for feeling
Mhm.
completely overwhelmed with the onslaught of technological options. You go to any conference or you look on any website, there's four and a
Mhm.
half thousand products that are perfect for your classroom. So, I guess my question in defense of teachers and those who are maybe have the will, but maybe they don't understand how to move forward, where do they start? Like, how do they start? How can I cut through some of the tech noise, if you will,
Mhm.
and figure out where to begin if I'm someone who wants to incorporate technology into my teaching, into my classroom experiences for my students? Where do I begin?
There is just so much out there, right? And thinking back
Hmm.
even to spring of 2020, I'm sure your inbox, just like mine, was
Yeah,
full of ed tech companies that I connected with at some point, right, over the past however many years, with the
yeah,
best of intentions,
exactly.
opening up, right, their tools and their resources and all the
Hmm.
things, right, so that people could jump in and do what they had to do in what was truly, an emergency situation, unexpected
Hmm.
situation. And
Right.
so, the great intentions are there, and there's lots of wonderful things out there, and I run a blog where I share lots of favorites. I
Hmm.
send out a weekly newsletter, right, that goes out with lots of favorites and updates, because I want people to know what's out there and available. But what I don't want is for their tool belt to be so heavy that instead of around their waist, they can't even lift it off the floor because they have too many things in there. And so,
Right.
I was out in Arizona just in December, working with a group of educators and doing a presentation that had a number, in the front of it, right? One of those
Right.
listicle style presentations.
Yeah.
And it gets people in the door, because just
Hmm.
like I will click on someone's 40 things you didn't know about the Burger King breakfast menu if they put it on Facebook, right? Because
Yeah.
I know I'm going to learn something about French toast sticks that I didn't know yesterday, right? Like I see there's a
Hmm.
perceived value to that, right? I'm not going to
Right.
remember all 40 things, but I'm going to use a couple of them. And so I like those presentations because it can reach a nice wide audience. But I
Hmm.
always start them off by saying, I want you to push back. When I share this formative assessment strategy and then I tell you a tool you can use to achieve that goal, I want
Hmm.
you to say, but Monica, couldn't I also use And yes, that's how I want you thinking about this,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like, here's a tool that you could add to your tool belt to accomplish this goal. But if you're using a tool that allows you to give voice feedback already,
Mhm.
or that
Mhm.
makes it easy to organize and color code information when it's sent in, like, that's what you want to stick with. But hopefully, you're looking at it through a new lens after our conversation. So, there's a lot out there. I will often make recommendations to say, you're going to want to have a tool that does something like this, or
Mhm.
look out for
Mhm.
this feature when you are using a tool that you already have access to. And a phrase I started using really at the beginning of this year, I think it came from one of my early podcast episodes to kick off 2021, I guess it was.
Mhm.
So that was one where I started using the phrase embrace your place. Like, if you're being told to use this learning management system, if someone picked it for you, even though you know that there's something better out there, like, embrace
Yeah.
that place and make sure anything else you're choosing works well within that system. So don't
Mhm.
force it, to fit right into that space. Make sure that you're really embracing this place where you have most likely professional development support at your school already for usage. You have
Mhm.
people in your building you can talk to about how things work or ideas that they might have. And then you can bring in these other pieces using that as your hub, because you're absolutely right. There's a lot out there, and it's really about the curation and picking what's going to be best for a particular moment.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right about the numbers, right? We like those 7 ways, 12 ways, 8
Yeah,
ways.
I love them. Right. But
I wa I wanna know what the 40 things about the Burger King breakfast menu. I'm curious now. I'm gonna have to dig into
right.
that. I think your point, though, at the end there leads me to the next question, and the question is about that curation, because I think sometimes we get enamored with technology. I remember, over a decade ago when I was working in a central office position, and there was the big push for, one-to-one laptops and interactive smart boards and things like
Mhm.
that. I have always been in the mindset that it really isn't about the tech itself, that the tech, if the tech just makes your lecture look, cooler and more colorful, that you really aren't making much of a difference. So, and we're not making maximizing, it's just a toy then, right? We're not
Mhm.
maximizing its impact. So am I right to say that the goal for any sort of technology, whether it's an app or a device, is really to lead to pedagogical enhancement? That's really what we're after. Am I right about that? And if I am, then maybe talk a little bit about how we can make sure that what we choose, what we curate, is actually going to lead to more effective instruction.
I absolutely agree with you in that statement. And, I have the new book from ASCD that came out in
Mhm.
2021, Ed Tech Essentials. But before that, my first publication with them was called Tasks Before Apps, like really
Mhm.
placing that learning front and center, using that as your guiding light as you're making decisions about technology use in a classroom setting. Because we've all been there on an expo hall floor, right? You mentioned conferences
Mhm.
earlier,
Exactly.
where everyone is in one corner looking at one thing, and is it bright and shiny, or is it really going to change the way that we're thinking about teaching and learning and thoughtful
Mhm.
instruction, or thoughtful and strategic fill in the blank, right, for your practice there. So
Right.
coming back to the why, I think, is really crucial. Doesn't mean we can't have bright and shiny and fun things happening, right? It's just a matter of
Mhm.
anchoring it in what our goals are. So, really saying to ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish here? Why are we using this tool, right? And that can really be a manyfold, right, answer of, well, we're using this to publish so the whole world can see, right? Or we
Right.
are using this because my students really need this voice to text to help them build their skills as writers, right? So that
Mhm.
reason of why could go in a lot of directions, but it's an important conversation starter if you are
Mhm.
planning collaboratively with a team. It's a great reflection, right, moment to say, all right, I like this. The kids are probably going to like this, but why are we using this? And so
Right.
it absolutely needs to come back to those goals as we're making choices, regardless of what type
Mhm.
of technology, it might not always be the right fit, but we want to be thoughtful when we are bringing something into the equation.
Yeah, there's always that question about that why question, right? The shiny objects. In my world around assessment and grading, I
Mhm,
often hear teachers say, "Oh, I love Kahoot," for example.
mhm,
I use Kahoot every day, and I'm like, but that's selected response. That is just a
Right.
multiple choice platform that is not always conducive to the right assessment method. So I think that point about, is it an enhancement? What's my purpose? Why do I need this? How is this going to make me more
Mhm.
effective as a teacher is an important one. Let's maybe finish up here with specific details. And listeners, we're not mentioning specific programs as endorsements or anything like that.
Mhm.
This is just from Monica's perspective. But I want to finish up maybe going through this a little bit methodically, some recommendations for listeners as they think about, yeah, either introducing some tech
Mhm.
into their teaching or thinking about how do I increase my sort of pedagogical repertoire by enhancing what I already do. And maybe take this subject grouping by subject grouping. We're going
Yeah.
to kind of
Mhm.
cluster some subjects here and think about what are some of the specific sort of recommendations. Again, these are, we're not being paid to endorse these products.
Mhm.
These are just
Mhm.
from Monica's perspective. These are products that you think are very effective. So let's start with language-based courses. Let's
Mhm.
talk about English language arts, social studies, world languages. What are some of your favorite apps or platforms that you think teachers who teach those subject areas would really benefit from using in terms of both the enhancement as far as meeting students
Mhm.
technologically, but also that pedagogical impact?
Yeah, so in this category and across categories, but especially here when we talk about ELA, social studies, world languages, I love open-ended creation tools, something that's a
Mhm.
blank canvas that when you get in there, you can typically do the same sort of things. You can record voice. You can
Mhm.
sometimes record video or add in pictures. What's great about having a camera tool built into something like this is that kids can work analog or offline and snap pictures of something they did hands on.
Mhm.
So, tools that have other media easy to embed or pull in, like a photo search or icon or shapes that they can pull in, and the ability to publish so just a teacher can see a file or a link, or the whole world could see it, right, if
Right.
audience is a area that you're really focused in on. And there's a bunch of tools that fall into this category. If you're on iPad, Apple Clips or iMovie might be one that you go to. I love Book Creator. I've done some work with their team and really seen them grow from just an iPad app that's popular to one that has been come, Chrome friendly and
Mhm.
friendly for different devices. So those tools that have features that give kids an opportunity to choose their own adventure, tell a story, are ones that I go to. Buncee is another one that falls into that category. Adobe Creative Cloud Express for education. I love the Spark tools, which was the old version, and I've done some work with them when I was in the Spark iteration, and I'm excited
Mhm.
to see some of those changes. So, those choose your own adventure, blank canvas kind of tools that a teacher can come back to multiple times over the school year and can use maybe even in a different content area, are ones that I love for language based courses.
Mhm. When you talk about voice options for language-based courses, are you talking about voice where student records for teacher, or is it also teacher for student? Are you looking at a kind of reciprocal use of those voice features, or is it just one way?
Yeah, it can absolutely be two ways. So if you think of a
Okay.
student first as kind of the publisher, like the final product, then absolutely letting them record their voice so that someone can hear their work and get a view of their learning through
Mhm.
audio. But there's tools that are great for feedback in language arts courses where you can record your voice as audio feedback, leave that little button that's right on there. Those are ones that have changed, I think, some of the way we think about even feedback. And when
Right.
I talk about them or talk about formative assessment and technology, I'll sometimes joke that, we've all gotten a text message from a friend or family member where we're not sure if they're joking or if they're mad at us or if it was a little snarky or what the sound was behind their text to you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of times that's probably us projecting, right? Just like a student who might submit an essay for feedback, not feeling super confident, right? Their interpretation of a comment on the Google Doc is going to be different than maybe if they
Mhm.
heard the enthusiasm in someone's voice. So,
Right.
there's just a lot that can happen there throughout the process in an ELA classroom that's really
Mhm.
transformed with these different tools.
Right. You made me think of feedback, of course, in my world around assessment and
Mhm.
formative assessment, the use of feedback. But of course, listeners, I would recommend you set a timer because it's very easy to be very long-winded with voice applications and
Absolutely.
overwhelm the student with your 10-minute sort of monologue about their assignment. So be careful of that. I suppose that's what emojis are for in texting, so people understand exactly what was meant. Otherwise, we need a sarcasm font, as many have
Right.
said, to understand sarcasm. I'm going to come back to that emoji because on a recent episode of your podcast, you talked
Mhm.
about use of emojis. I want to come back to that momentarily, but let's talk about STEM. What are some
Mhm.
of your favorite apps, platforms for STEM?
So there's a lot of different resources out there when it comes to some of the individual activities students might participate in a STEM classroom. And if you
Mhm.
have a background in using Microsoft tools, even something like Excel, right? A lot has changed from right when you
Yeah.
and I might have first encountered those tools in different settings, right? So I would
Mhm.
say go back to some of these classic, if you will, tools and take a peek at what they've done. Microsoft Education has a lot of STEM resources too, that are really useful there. But what I would encourage as well when it comes to sharing different activities is to think creatively about what kids can do to show their learning. So,
Mhm.
shifting from a traditional lab report that might be very writing heavy, which could be a struggle for a student who's really passionate about science but is building right their ELA skills. Well, maybe
Mhm.
in a STEM classroom for that lab report, you're introducing them to a podcasting tool like Soundtrap or GarageBand and having them interview an expert or publish their lab report in an audio format. Not to say that the writing piece isn't important, but building capacity, right, on confidence, right, along that way. So I would say for STEM, taking a look at some specific tools that might feel traditional and looking at ways that they have grown. So, going to your specific tool belt in your discipline, but then thinking about alternative assessment options for a more authentic product that might
Mhm.
mirror some of the content students consume.
Yeah. It the there's so much overlap, and I want to make sure that listeners understand that certainly with STEM there are times where those open-ended, more conducive to writing kinds of apps are applicable. But I love the idea of being able to specialize. I also appreciate you saying when you and I encountered those programs, because I'm definitely a lot older than you are. So I probably encountered Excel long before you did, Monica. But I appreciate it. I'll take it. Uh, but let's finish up here. I want to come back to those emojis, but I want to talk about those specialty areas. What about
Mhm.
subjects like physical education, or you mentioned GarageBand, so that's obviously very
Yeah.
conducive for
Mhm.
music, but music, art, performing arts, physical education, classes that are more specialty areas. What are some of your favorite platforms, apps, things like that?
So, when it comes to consumption of content or introducing students to something new, especially in the disciplines, there's a
Hmm.
lot of great YouTube channels and specific content that go along. So, if you're in a PE classroom talking about a student's golf swing, right, for example, not only can you pull up a quick video on YouTube and talk about
Hmm.
different swings from professional athletes, but you can also use apps to film right all over your tablet, right, and show what a student might want to switch or change. And it may feel like a broadcast, sports news a type of piece, but these are readily accessible apps that fall into those categories. Art classroom, same thing, being able to pull up a performance or a monologue or something that
Hmm.
students can watch as an exemplar that might have been more challenging in the past. The quality, the ease, the efficiency of being able to do that is huge, right? And some favorite examples there too, and this would fall even into the music or talking about physical education and different kind of content pieces. I love TED Ed. So TED Talks are great, but TED Ed,
Right.
which they have their own YouTube channel, their own ed.ted.com, is an
Hmm.
example I love sharing for specialty areas, because if
Yeah.
there's, a little topic, something a little niche, an origin story that's really going to hook students in who might not have signed up for that class but need that
Mhm.
extra push to get excited, that's one of my favorite places to go to for quick pieces of information that can grab
Right.
someone's attention.
Right. So as we sort of think about these platforms, I'm going to express to you sort of what comes to mind, and you let me know if I'm on the right track with this and try to articulate this for listeners. I'm sort of what I'm hearing you say is that there are two sides to this coin. There is the consumption side, then there's the production side. And in each of those, we'll have some features that are, so again, knowing what your learning goal is, knowing what the intention of the activity might be, which side of that ledger am I on? We know there's a Venn diagram between the two, but which
Mhm.
side of the ledger? Am I on the right track with thinking that first point?
Yeah, and I think that, when we're able to give students high quality pieces of
Hmm.
resources to consume, we're able to talk through our own choices and vetting. Like, I know this is
Hmm.
a great example because, or did you notice how this creator did this? It really
Hmm.
sets them up for success as consumers.
Right.
We're not going to ask a student to make a podcast if we're not sharing a podcast with them to listen to, right? So the same
Hmm.
thing can be flipped to say, if you put kids behind the camera, if you will, or as a creator role, they're going to become more diligent consumers and evaluators of content. When they
Yeah.
say, how did they do that? Or can I
Hmm.
trust this? Or I know that's a quick trick for this, right? So there's just a
Hmm.
lot of value from wearing both of those hats. Just
Right.
like you said, there's an overlap on what your goals might be. And I don't think it's a one or the other, right? But
Hmm.
introducing both of those strategically to students.
Yeah, even just looking at it and consuming it and then thinking about what was in the mindset of the creator, what were they thinking
Mhm.
about as they go with that. Would you also be of the mindset, the parallel to this is in sports where they often advise coaches to choose a few drills that kind of get home so that you're not constantly changing the platform or you're not changing the drills, but you teach the drill and then you refine the skill. Would you be of the same mindset with tech to say, find a handful of platforms or
Mhm.
apps that are really conducive to what you're doing and get good at that, refine that? You don't have to do it all. You don't have to do everything. You just find a few that really help enhance the learning experience for students and go deep with them. Would you be of that mindset as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quality over quantity here for sure. And there's a lot
Yeah.
of reasons for that. And you mentioned, right, a few there, right, that are front of
Hmm.
mind for me, right? We're saving time when it comes to onboarding. We're having a better experience where kids are feeling confident within a space,
Right.
they know what to do. They're not questioning things, or, and I don't mean asking questions, but they're not questioning
Hmm.
themselves as they move through if they're doing things correctly, right? And they're
Hmm.
a little bit deeper. And so I'm always looking for tools that have multiple purposes or multiple use cases that are
Right.
going to have that depth as opposed to just the surface level. Doesn't mean
Right.
you might not pull up a YouTube video that might feel a little random. You're never going to go back to that YouTube channel again. It just checks the box for the day. But when we're
Hmm.
going deep, especially into that creation and production side, or assessment routines, the more thoughtful we can be around the long game, the better.
Right, right. All right, emojis. I feel like I've overhyped this a little bit in this through the conversation, but I have to say, it was a December episode of your podcast,
Mhm.
and I found it fascinating because it's something I'd never thought of before, and I think that's part of the wonder of technology is you're introduced to things that you aren't maybe not familiar with. So I'm just going to give you some space here to talk about, many would not connect the dots between emojis, which seem most of the time is a fun part of our
Right.
texting routines, and learning. So what's in maybe just a couple of minutes here, what is the best way or the most effective way to incorporate emojis into teaching and learning?
Yes, and I will tell you that I, was not someone who was using emojis from the very first time it popped up on my keyboard. I had an
Me
eye
neither.
roll about it, right? If someone sent it to me and just thought they were
Yeah.
kind of cheesy before I'm just, jumped right in with everyone else, I guess, right? And so
Yeah.
that podcast, that episode of my Easy Ed Tech podcast was really around ways to use emojis that might surprise you, right? So things
Hmm.
that might not be as evident as what you mentioned already about adding into a feedback, right? Or within a text message to communicate tone. That's on the list, right, of reasons we might use it
Of
for
course.
sure. But there's other smaller moments where visual cues on a chart we're sharing with students,
Hmm.
adding emojis into a folder that we see every day in our Google Drive, right, is going to help us just get to where we need to be, right? So there's a lot that you can do even with coding if you're giving feedback, right? Maybe there's a few different emojis, 5 that you stick with all year, right, in your correspondence with
Hmm.
students. So kids see it, they know it, and they move on, right, to what action they have to take. So,
Yeah.
there's so many ways that you can use them in different content areas, maybe having students retell a story in just 5 emojis. I love the creativity that comes alive when there's constraints to something like that too. So there's just a lot of ways to bring it in that might not be so obvious, that once they're in your practice, they might seem like a no-brainer.
Yeah. maybe two that we don't want to use for feedback: the shrugged shoulders
Right.
and maybe
Right, the face
and
palm.
yeah, the hand to the face, right, or whatever. Like, it's like we might
Mhm.
want to leave those out of our repertoire as
Exactly.
we're giving
Yeah.
kids feedback. Like, I have no idea
Mhm.
what you're talking about, or this is completely off base.
Right.
Can I ask you about podcasts too before we
Yeah.
jump into those
Mhm.
last two questions? And again, just as we finish up here, just briefly, what is the most effect? Because I hear so many teachers talking now, and I don't have any experience with this, but I hear so many teachers online talking about how they utilize podcasts in the classroom.
Mhm.
What are some of the most effective ways that you've seen teachers incorporate, not as consumers, but as producers?
A
That's the
producer.
side I want to talk about. What are some of the ways that you've seen podcasts get incorporated into student experiences where they are the producers of that?
So that can mean a lot of things when
For
someone
sure.
says, right, or is bringing in podcasting and creation. It could be short form audio where
Hmm.
students are posting a quick little piece of information or giving a synopsis of something that they've read. So for a quick entry, there's a couple tools that make it a little bit easier to set up kids for success. Padlet is one where if
Hmm.
you've used Padlet before, it's kind of known for putting sticky notes on the page, but kids can leave audio notes. So when we talk about podcasting with students, it could be as simple as gathering some audio notes. They have 30 seconds or less to make a case for something or to share the hook for their persuasive writing that they're working on. For longer form pieces, it could include interviews. These are great to put side by side in a project based learning environment where you might interview
Hmm.
experts as part of your research, right? Turning that into a podcast. It might not be the final product in the vision of what you might traditionally think of as PBL, but you could have
Hmm.
those as publishing points along the way. Having students act something out, right, or think about the type of music that goes along with a scene that they're writing. So if they've written a personal narrative, there may be moments where something needs to happen in the background, right, or a sound effect is really going to communicate the tone
Hmm.
in a way that will help them become a stronger writer as they think about what words they need to use to make that happen. So there's just a
Right.
lot of deep conversations that can happen throughout the production process. There's some natural connections like interviews with experts or bringing writing to life that are a really great way to start. But I would encourage anyone who's thinking about that as a production piece to take a look at what is out there for student consumers as a great starting point, because I'm
Hmm.
confident if you share examples with your students, they'll come back to you with ways they want to try, right, that medium that's going to
Right.
be
Right.
meaningful for them too.
We are, as the expression goes, we are only limited by our imagination and what is possible. It's if you think it's possible, it probably is when it comes to the incorporation of technology into teaching and learning. I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for another 4 hours about the possibilities, and we probably would not have a lot of overlap in terms of what is possible. But as we finish up today, Monica, I have two questions as I finish every interview. These are two questions I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, and the first one, you can take this in any direction that you wish, but educationally speaking, what keeps you up at night?
Well, to make an ed tech connection for this question, we've
Right.
heard the term digital divide used a lot, not recently, but for a while now. And in the
Hmm.
past, that was really taken to think about access to physical devices, right? What does that look like in terms of who has what? And so, one area of concern that I think is coming up more and more in conversations is not just the do I have that device, but what's happening. So that
Mm.
shift from the quantity of what's out there to the quality of experiences is definitely something that I think a lot about, right? How to support people to have higher quality experiences, to choose when to use something, to choose when to put it aside. Those are definitely areas that I think a lot about.
Right. And acutely, as we talked about this earlier, with the onset of the pandemic, certainly access and certainly quality of experience was at the forefront of so many schools and school districts' minds as things shifted dramatically in the spring of 2020. Last question as we finish up today. And this is a question about success. And obviously, as someone who has been very successful and is very successful and will continue to be very successful, if a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, "What's your definition of success?" Monica, how would you answer them?
So, success to me is all about impact, Right? Am I
Mhm.
having the impact that I think is important, right? That mission-driven connection to my work is really essential. So when I think of defining success, it really comes down to that who has been impacted by my
Mhm.
time and my work and what I'm excited to share.
Yeah, I love that. I think impact. Anytime we make an impact, we a positive impact is always a great way to define success for sure. Listeners, you definitely should follow Monica either on Twitter or Instagram. The handle is the same. It's at Class Tech Tips. You can also find Monica on Pinterest and LinkedIn. I'll put links in the show notes for all of those social media platforms and handles as well. Please check out Monica's website, www.classtechtips.com, where you're going to find a ton of great stuff. There's Monica's blog is there, and certainly ways to connect with Monica should you wish to work with her more extensively. Monica, this was fantastic. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.